Welcome back. You would talk today. It's just gone 6:30 Tuesday morning with the papers in just a minute. But here is what else is coming up on this morning's programme.
Another record for Lionel Messi as he wins his 8th Ballon d'Or. Shaban Ahern will be telling us all about that just before 7 a.m. The plague of the pothole story that always gets you guys talking, as the AA attend an average of 50,000 incidents a month. At 7:45, we'll talk to Mr. Pothole himself.
What?
About the problem, you heard.
All right.
And have police given up on prosecuting cyclists for traffic offences? Stay tuned for a TalkTV exclusive, another one this morning. And we're going to be having an investigation and learning more about that just before 9 a.m.
Let's take a look, though, at some of this morning's front pages you're waking up to. The Telegraph paying tribute to the Israeli soldier who's been reunited with her family after being kidnapped by Hamas terrorists. The Miracle, Boris Johnson's government a tragic joke, as explosive WhatsApp messages are revealed during the COVID inquiry. And on the front page of The Sun, Portuguese police have finally apologised to the parents of Madeleine McCann 16 years after she went missing.
Incredible. Well, the writer and broadcaster Emma Wolfe and journalist and author James Bloodworth are with us for a look through this morning's papers. Good morning, both. Thanks for coming back.
Can I just jump in? How did you get here, Emma Wolfe?
I cycled in.
You and I are going to have such a
we are.
today.
We'll have to get you in for the debate later
Ever been
as
through
well.
a red light on your cycle?
It may have happened.
Ever been through
disgraceful. No.
Ever been through a red light in your car?
No. Listen,
OK, has your driver ever been through a red light?
For motorists. She pays no road tax, no insurance. It's
and I'm not polluting the planet, and I'm green, and I'm
sure
not
she pays
damaging
road
the
tax
roads.
for the car. She also
here
buys.
we go. Anyway, let's do the papers then.
Let's
I'm
do
only
the
joking,
papers.
you know that.
Right, front page of the Express. Calls for a ceasefire in Gaza have been rejected by the Israeli PM.
Absolutely rejected. We may be discussing ceasefires and humanitarian corridors and all of that here, but Netanyahu is in absolutely no mood for compromise or any discussion of ceasefire. He's been saying that calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism. He quotes the Bible. He says, there is a time for peace and a time for war. This is a time for war. The last 24 hours, he's shown that he is absolutely, laser focused on getting into Gaza and invading, and he is not in any mood for discussions of ceasefire.
James, it's Nick and I sit here every morning, and I think as responsible broadcasters, one can only really give the facts on this, because we keep having to say this, don't we? I mean, every time you look at the humanitarian disaster that's unfolding and you think, oh, my goodness, you think back 3 weeks to what happened. You hear about that girl whose skull they found yesterday. Can we please be absolutely factual about that? You read in The Sun today that £1.5 billion worth of aid is coming from potentially Iran and Qatar for Hamas. For me, it's more than that now. It's about how this gets done, if it's going to get done. And this is very basic, what I'm trying to say, not too well, with the least amount of bloodshed. Does that resonate? Am I right by saying that?
Yeah, I think so. I think the point Joe Biden made a few weeks ago that what Israel mustn't do is make the same mistakes that the US made after 9/11. So the US went into Afghanistan, overthrew the Taliban, which I think was probably the right decision to start with, but then was there for almost 20 years in the country, and then went into Iraq and solved nothing, killed hundreds of thousands of people. And I don't think Israel turning Gaza into rubble is not going to solve this problem. I think you need to go to the root of this problem, which is a Palestinian state, first of all, but also stopping. Why is Qatar allowed to fund Hamas? We fake Qatar. The World Cup was there last year.
Completely
we invite their leaders to this country. Even the Saudi leader is coming to Britain, I think, next year. This kind of, when these countries have money, when they have oil wealth, we kind of pander to them, and then all the while they're funding extremism through Hamas, for example.
I find the whole thing, I mean, front of the Mail, same story, but and we are not playing this video. I'm just going to nail that here and now. Israeli PM condemns barbarians of Hamas as they parade 3 distraught women in hostage video. I've seen it. It's utterly disgusting, and I won't play it.
It is, and the details coming out every day, more details about that, about the October the 7th, about, as you say, that young German tattoo artist, fragments of her skull been found. The miraculous rescue overnight of Ori Megdish, an Israeli army private who was seized by Hamas. I mean, there are moments of just absolute, you can't imagine how delighted and overwhelmed her parents must feel. But the absolute desperation, and James is absolutely right, this is not the solution, but what else? How else can Israel respond at this point? We know we're bedding in for a long, long war, and we're not getting to the root causes of the problems in any way.
And James, so much of this war is being played out on social media as well, from both sides, propaganda videos that are really quite difficult to verify. Also, some material coming out from the Israeli official Twitter page that you wouldn't really normally expect to come
odd parody
from odd
videos.
parody videos and things like that. It's quite difficult to know what's real and what's not.
Yeah, and Twitter's made this problem much worse when it took away the verification badges from journalists last year, and now you can simply buy a verification badge. So you've got bad actors, grifters, basically, who are trying to make money from the platform, posting images from Syria, for example. So one of the issues, I speak to Syrian activists about the war that's been going on there, the Russian bombing there, and they say that now, people ignored the war in Syria for so long, and now people are taking images from the war in Syria and using them and pretending it's Gaza, and they're finally paying attention to the war in Syria, but using it for these kind of nefarious ends, just to make money on Twitter, because you now make money. You now have people with blue ticks who get paid based on the number of impressions their tweets get.
Where do you both, very briefly, very difficult question, but we've spoken over the last few days militarily, we've spoken to a hostage negotiator, we've spoken to both sides of this conflict. Where does this end? Where does it end?
No, well, that's the question.
Can you defeat Hamas, or will they just splinter out?
Precisely.
And they disappear into their population, and they reappear in other guises.
But we had this discussion at 4:30 this morning. If one of my kids or one of my family members had been taken, kidnapped as hostage, and I saw those images, I would absolutely want my government to get them back at all costs. And I'm not in any way. It's so difficult.
I genuinely say I don't know how, and I said this on October the 7th, the 7th and the 8th. I don't know how a mother who's had their baby killed is ever able to take another breath in this world without being in agony.
But also, how would you feel if you were the family of those hostages and you saw your own government bombing the exact areas where you're...
You'd want to know more, wouldn't you? Listen, a couple more to slip in this hour. Front of the Times, Boris Johnson made it impossible for government to fight COVID due to his complete indecision.
I mean, this is almost like relief from the Israeli-Gaza conflict, but it's not. It's absolutely serious as well, because this is what's been happening over the past 2-3 years in this country, and it's no surprise. I mean, this COVID inquiry is no surprise to people like me who thought lockdown was ludicrous from the beginning, who thought that it was made on ridiculous, the decision-making was ridiculous, the reality of it was ridiculous, and they were lying, dithering and flip-flopping throughout. So this is the revelation that Boris Johnson was indeed the shopping trolley that we all, that we've heard him described as, that he flip-flops, that he swerves from one decision to another throughout the pandemic, that he was veering between, one day he wanted stricter lockdowns, the next day he thought that we should open up the country. He said loathsome things like, well, people are going to die anyway, what's the point of locking down people? Why are we trashing the economy because if people are going to die anyway? That kind of stuff. The constant flip-flopping. People, senior civil servant Simon Case saying things like he changes strategic decision every day. They simply weren't able to, pretty much unable to work with this man.
This
damaging stuff, and there's more to come.
What do we say, 2026 or something, isn't it?
I'm not sure, it wouldn't surprise me how long it will take to actually come to any kind of conclusion that we ultimately already know. Anyway, but James, was these WhatsApp messages, they're just a window into a period of time, aren't they? They're like a time capsule. Do you think they show a man who was grappling with a killer virus or a man who was grappling with his own popularity?
A bit of both. So I think on one level, I'm willing to grant the government of that time some leeway because we were dealing with a virus that was unprecedented. No one quite knew how lethal it was to begin with. But what really bugs me is the hypocrisy. So I was, the first lockdown, I think I was someone who, went all in with that. I was happy to do my bit. I was sheltering my grandmother. I think that, I did wash my hands. I didn't go out. I was careful around people. But then you see that people like Dominic Cummings were driving up to Durham and then lying about it and pretending, saying it's about his eyesight and stuff. And, Number 10 throwing these parties and stuff while, we were sent out on the streets to kind of clap for carers. The NHS was overwhelmed. Some of these people were being... we're doing a really, really tough job, and then you had people in government just taking the mickey, basically.
Still
I think
hurts.
That's what.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's what really
goes on.
People weren't allowed to go to the funerals of their relatives, and then you had people partying in Downing Street. I think that's what really grates about this.
It's very personal, isn't it?
I visited my dad for 9 months behind glass. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I had a baby in lockdown. There were women on there were partners of women outside the hospital. You remember this stuff.
Yeah.
You remember the antenatal appointments and all of that. You weren't allowed to take anyone.
I don't go with that
all of
antenatal rubbish, by the way.
No, but women worked completely alone. The partners were outside the hospitals, not able to go in until, when I'm telling Nicola...
Well, your wife is going to be exactly the same this time round, because he won't turn up.
Advice. You know when they go, right, do your breathing exercise. Emma and I will tell you this. Ooh, do your breathing. You know when push comes to shove, excuse the pun, nobody remembers that at all.
They don't.
All that rubbish. You know, oh, let's all squat and talk. No, get out of the room!
Dolphin music, forget the whale
Can
music.
I finish, though, on the story in the Mirror? Obviously, yesterday, James, Emma, the really sad news that Matthew Perry... I mean, everybody had a Chandler Bing moment. This statement released by the surviving 5 cast members last night. Jennifer Aniston, Courtney Cox, David Schwimmer, Matt LeBlanc and Lisa Kudrow said, we are also utterly devastated by the loss of Matthew. We were more than just classmates. We were family. There's so much to say, but right now we're going to take a moment to grieve and process this unfathomable loss. In time, we will say more as and when we are able. For now, our thoughts and our love are with Matthew's family, his friends and everyone who loved him around the world. Incredible man. Really?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even watch Friends, but it was something you couldn't really avoid. It was kind of the cultural kind of backdrop of my childhood in the 90s, and we shouldn't speculate necessarily on the cause of death. I mean, there's been no... He's someone who did suffer from various addictions, but the toxicology report hasn't come through yet. He's someone who talked about the struggles with fame, and I found something very interesting and poignant that he said was that, you know, fame doesn't solve your problems, but you only realise that once you're actually famous. And yeah, it's a very sad story. He was a very young, very talented actor, and I think that is where we should kind of leave it at the moment instead of speculating on what caused the death.
In between cycling, Friends fan?
No, well, I don't really watch television, but I think it's a lovely statement from the gang. I mean, you can't imagine them not being 6. You know, them being 5 is just not quite right. And you know that they were actually mates. You know, there's all this nonsense about people being really good friends, and you always think, yeah, pinch of salt. I think with that gang, you could tell.
Real.
You do.
Like us.
Are we mates?
Yeah, you could tell
we are mates. We're absolutely mates.
They were close, and I think that comes across.
I'll be there for you, but
not there for me too.
Not at the birth.
OK, good. That's fantastic news. Right, Emma and James, thank you so much for joining us. They'll be back, of course, in just under an hour.